When I went through the world's holy books, they all attempt to predict future historical events. The problem is only the Bible gets everything right. When you look at the Bible, you don't find just 50 predictions of future historical events. You find several hundred predictions of future historical events. And it gets them all right. Now, there's some that have not yet been fulfilled.
I was reading something you had written about Bible prophecies and them being fulfilled. And I think that's actually a really interesting thing that is not talked about quite as often as I think it should be. And so I'd be curious if you could sort of lay some of that out for us in terms of how do we know that the prophecy was written when it was said to have been written and that the fulfillment of it happened when it was said to, because if there really are truly fulfilled prophecies that we can actually corroborate and see that they really took place when they are said to have taken place, that's extremely powerful.
When I went through the world's holy books, they all attempt to predict future historical events. The problem is only the Bible gets everything right. So, for example, I went through Mormonism. I found the prophecy that Oliver Cowdery would become a household name. Most Mormons have no clue who Oliver Cowdery is. So, that's just one of over 50 prophecies made in the 3 books that found Mormonism that we now know are incorrect. And that's the case with the other holy books. When you look at the Bible, you don't find just 50 predictions of future historical events. You find several hundred predictions of future historical events. And it gets them all right. Now, there's some that have not yet been fulfilled because the Bible actually predicts historical events that haven't happened yet. But most of the prophecy in the Bible has already been fulfilled. I mean, probably the classic example would be the book of Daniel. In fact, I debated the religion editor of Skeptic magazine on the book of Daniel. His way was to say, well, it was written in the 5th or 6th century AD, so everything predicted in Daniel was after the fact. But in the debate, I gave the evidence that indeed the book of Daniel was written in the 5th century BC, 5th or 6th century BC, not the 5th or 6th century AD. The language is all there. Moreover, notice that the book of Daniel shows up in the Septuagint, which has been carbon 14 dated to the 2nd century BC. So there you got undeniable evidence that it predates the 2nd century BC. And the book of Daniel predicts the arising of several world empires, that the Babylonian Empire would arise and then be defeated by the Persian and Median Empire, which would be defeated by the Greek Empire, and the Greek Empire would be overtaken by a strong empire to the west of Greece, which we now know to be the Roman Empire. And the book of Daniel got everything correct in those predictions. And when you look at it, the detail is phenomenal because it actually talks about how there would be this strong leader from the west of Persia that would defeat the Persian Empire. But at the moment of the height of his power, he would die, and how his kingdom would be split into 4 pieces. And history reveals that indeed Alexander the Great, after he had conquered most of the known world, at age 33, got an illness and died from the illness. And his empire was split amongst his 4 generals. So, and that's, probably the most dramatic example is one that I got coming out in March, which is Psalm 22, written 3,000 years ago, 1,000 years before the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. But Psalm 22 predicts in detail how the Messiah would die and talks about how his feet and his hands would be nailed and pierced. And this was done several hundred years before the invention of the crucifixion as a means of execution. And it talked about, and what really got me is Psalm 22 even predicts the exact words of mockery that would be thrown at Jesus by the religious leaders when he was dying on the cross. And the words of mockery from Gentiles that be thrown at him at the scene of the cross. And you notice in the gospel accounts, it actually has Jesus on the cross dying, and the first words out of his mouth, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That's the opening statement of Psalm 22. The last words of Jesus, "It is finished." The last words of Psalm 22, "It is finished." And it tells us there was a Roman centurion who was in charge of the execution of Jesus and the two thieves. When he heard those words of Jesus, what did he say? "Surely this was the Son of God." He was probably a centurion that was familiar with the Old Testament. It's possible Jesus was quoting Psalm 22 as he was dying on the cross. And in Psalm 22, over 30 specific details of how Jesus would die on the cross are recorded there. Every one of them happened. And I can imagine if the centurion was familiar with Psalm 22, he would have been driven to proclaim, "This has surely got to be the Son of God." Word for word, everything in Psalm 22 is being fulfilled right before my eyes.
What's fascinating about that too is that you could, if you were being skeptical, you could make the argument that Jesus knew about the prophecy, so he said those things to sort of fulfill it, voila. But what's interesting is all of those details in between are totally outside of his control. Those are things that people were doing without any awareness of that, and they would have no reason to, bring about a fulfilled prophecy when their entire intention was that he
Well,
is.
proof of that is that there were people who were, quote, fake messiahs
Mhm.
who said, okay, we know what the Old Testament says about the Messiah. Let's concoct the fulfillment of those prophecies. The most successful of those fake messiahs was a fellow by the name of Bar Jesus. He was able to concoct 8 of the 300 prophecies about the Messiah that you find in the Old Testament. How many did Jesus of Nazareth fulfill? 109. Now you say, what about the other 200? Well, he's going to come again. In his second coming, he'll fulfill the remaining 200. But the fact that he fulfilled 109 without error tells us he really is who he claimed to be. And as you mentioned, most of those 109 are beyond his personal control,
Mhm.
like the one in Zechariah, where it says that he would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, and those 30 pieces of silver would be used to purchase a burial ground for the poor in Jerusalem. And that's exactly what Judas did. He betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, and when he realized that the consequences weren't what he intended, he threw those 30 pieces at the feet of the Jewish religious leaders, and they used those 30 pieces to buy a burial ground for the poor. This was all outside the control of Jesus of Nazareth, and yet it was fulfilled precisely to the letter.
Have you ever left your house without locking the front door? Probably yes. Not the smartest move, but I think we've all been there. It's basically what you're doing when you browse the internet without protecting your personal data. Let me explain. Here's the deal for those that don't know. Data brokers are constantly harvesting your private information. Things like your full name, your email address, your home address, even sensitive stuff like your health or location data are now being sold, all without your consent or permission. I honestly did not even realize this was a thing until I experienced it firsthand, and I did not like it. That's when I started looking for a solution, and that's when I came across Incogni, a service that hunts down where your data is being stored and sends official legal requests to have it removed. There's no guesswork. There's no paperwork. They handle everything behind the scenes. And since signing up, by the way, I've actually noticed a change. Way fewer scam calls, less spam email, and most importantly, at least to me, is the removal of that sort of low-level stress of just wondering how people might use some personal information against you in a negative way, right? So that is now gone. So if you're tired of being the product, it's time to push back. Head to incogni.com/dose of wisdom or use the promo code dose of wisdom at checkout to get 60% off your annual plan. That's incogni.com/dose of wisdom or use the promo code dose of wisdom. Take your data out of their hands before they sell it to someone else.
Another thing I think about is how many of these prophecies, if the Messiah hasn't come yet, if it wasn't Jesus, they're obsolete. I mean, people don't use silver in that way anymore that I'm aware of. So it's sort of this idea. And there's a lot of them that I've kind of looked into that are like that, where they're an anachronism that it wouldn't make sense in the modern world. So I don't know if you kind of follow that or not, where it's like people aren't
Oh,
really
I
being
do. I mean,
crucified
like
and
Daniel chapter 9 actually prophesies the timing of the coming of the Messiah. Basically says it would be 487 years after the signing of the decree for the restoration of Israel as a nation by the Persian king. So, uh, and you know, that's what caused the wise men to come looking for the newborn king,
mm,
is that they were aware of the prophecy of Daniel. And admittedly, there are three different decrees to restore Israel as a nation. But those decrees are within one another in less than a decade. And so the Magi, they knew the approximate timing of the coming of the Messiah. They saw this event in the heavens and said, this has got to be the sign. They went to Jerusalem. They didn't know the location, but when they got to Jerusalem, they inquired of the religious leaders and saying, we know this is the time. Can you help us with a location? And they said, yes, the prophet Micah says that he would be born in Bethlehem. They said, well, thank you. And they went
mm.
off to Bethlehem. And, you know, Bethlehem's a small village. It wouldn't have been that difficult for them to find a couple with a firstborn son and to put their gifts before him. So, yeah, it's just one of another 100 examples that you can pull from the Old Testament that was fulfilled in the life of Jesus.
It's really awesome going to the Holy Land and seeing that geography too, because as you were describing that, I remember driving from downtown Jerusalem, the old city, over to Bethlehem, and it's not very far away. I mean, it's totally feasible that they could have made that hike and been there within, you know, a few days easily. So I don't know, it's really cool seeing when you just read it in the book, you're like, how far is that 100 miles away? You know, what is it? How does this story even add up logistically? But
Yeah,
it's,
it's only 20 miles, so that could conceivably be done in one day. If you
yeah.
want to take your time, it's a 2-day trip.
Yep. Yep. Well, let's end on this note. I know we're running up against our time here, but I wanted to ask you this question again, just because I'm aware of the fact that there's the whole spectrum of people at different places in their spiritual journey who listen to this channel. So I wanted to give you, in conclusion, just the opportunity to speak to someone who isn't watching the channel just because they want to be angry at us religious folk, but who actually does have an openness in some capacity to God, but maybe, you know, maybe they're not fully convinced of this, or maybe they're just in this place of agnosticism, I guess you could say. And I want to I guess, end by giving you the chance to speak to that person. What advice would you give, thinking about yourself when you were in that search mode and that, you know, that truth quest mode? What would you say to your former self, or what would you say to a person who's in that place?
Well, for me, I just kept searching and kept asking questions. Man, I had a lot of questions. I had a lot of doubts that I needed to work through. And so just keep up with the pursuit. I mean, as you see yourself getting more answers, you realize, you know what? This is working for me. And so I would just say, keep asking questions, keep searching, you know, keep digging in, see and accrue the evidence, and find people you can talk to. And so, I mean, uh, I still had a lot of questions after I'd given my life to Jesus Christ. And when I got to Caltech, that's where I met a lot of Christians who are research scientists. And I says, hey, I got this list of questions. You know, none of them are catastrophic for my Christian faith, but I really want to get some answers. And so just having a dialogue with them, I realized, you know, they researched this years ago and they gave me an answer that was really good. So finding the right people you can talk to, I mean, it's one reason why I and the scholars at Reasons to Believe maintain a Twitter page and a Facebook page. We don't tell you what we're eating for dinner or what we're doing on our in our backyard. We use our our Facebook and Twitter pages exclusively to engage people with their questions. And so, I mean, just today, I probably answered 50 questions on my Facebook and Twitter pages.
You
So,
personally?
well, I personally, right. And I can't get to all of them because, some days I get 300 questions posted.
Hmm.
But I try to go after the most significant ones. And hey, I'm not alone. There's other people you can go to. And people are welcome to write their questions in to Reasons to Believe. We have people that look at those questions seriously and then look at the books. And so, I've now written 23 books, and every book I write is designed to answer questions I've heard from skeptics and from unbelievers. And so they can begin there. And hey, if they got questions I don't address, I'd love to hear it because I'm on a mission to write some more books. So uh, I'd love to hear what people think is something I haven't covered yet in my books and writings. And they'll find thousands of articles that they can read for free at reasons.org that again are designed to answer people's questions. But we're also willing to engage people personally. I've done a number of Zoom meetings with skeptics where we just get together and say, hey, let me hear your questions. And we have a dialogue.
I love that so much because I think that sometimes people feel a sense of that questions are bad, doubt is bad, and I love the heart that you have on that. And I feel the exact same way. Questions are good. Questions are how you bring things to the surface, bring things into the light and get to know the truth. So there's a ton of videos I do on this channel where it'll be a Q&A, and it's exactly that. Well, what about hell? How is God good in the face of hell? Well, great
Right.
question. Millions and millions and millions of people have that question. Let's answer it.